I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. Guardianships can be an important resource for someone who lacks the capacity to make critical day-to-day decisions about their lives, but the system can sometimes be subject to abuse, including in a high-profile case that prompted a legislative response in Florida and New York, keeping families separated. In response to this dynamic, New York State lawmakers approved a bill in June that is supposed to expedite any judicial debates over family visitation for someone under the care of a guardian. For more on the underlying problem and the legislative response, we're joined by the measure's assembly sponsor, Long Island Democrat Tommy John Schiavoni. Well, this legislation is known as Carolyn's Law, named for an elderly woman living under the care of an appointed guardian who denied visitations by the woman's daughter. Can you explain what was going on and why it inspired legislative action?
This was a case that is actually over several states, and one of the daughters who brought this to our attention, she lives in the state of New York, and essentially what had happened is that her mother had been isolated from her own brother and other members of the family by another family member. These things get awfully dicey or tricky, especially when there's monies involved. So it was very difficult for the daughter to actually see her mother and to get access to her mother. And the mother was being medicated and she was being isolated from the rest of the family. And there were also issues, financial issues. I'll just leave that there in terms of payments and moving monies around. So they really wanted to do something here in New York. And this bill was actually introduced years ago by my Senate colleague, Tony Palumbo, and it has now been carried by Senator Cleary and my predecessor, Fred Thiel. And when I came into office this year, when we were reviewing some of the legislation, we took a look at this one. And this was one of these things that I actually thought would be the case, but it's not. And particularly the discretion of the judges in New York State to allow family visitations, and I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit.
Well, yeah, let's talk about some of the provisions of this bill, and the two that stand out are the timeliness in which a judge is required to act on certain orders related to family visitation, as well as this idea of a rebuttable presumption in favor of visitation by family members. So can you explain how this legislation would change the status quo?
Right. The statute says that the judges have to decide whether or not family visitation would be allowed by a preponderance of the evidence. It's a pretty low bar. Think of like 50-50 or 51-49. So guardians would often win those cases and excluding family from access to a loved one. What this bill does, it changes it to a clear and convincing evidence standard that has to be presented by the guardian in order to prevent visitation. And that has to be presented to the judge. And so the rebuttable presumption is that the judge is going to allow visitation unless the guardian, the person who's legally bound and has the court order, says that they can't, but they have to provide some real evidence to the judge in order to keep a family member out. And so clear and convincing evidence, you think of it as 90 or 95% to 5%. So the primary reason why I carried this bill is because I believe that sunshine is the best disinfectant, and I think if there are no issues, then family members should be able to visit loved ones and visit them and to check in on them and have a relationship. There are a myriad of benefits to having relationships to family members, for someone who is incapacitated or has a guardianship. This is going to help everyone, in my view.
And additionally, there's a timeliness factor to this. What judges typically had 4 weeks to weigh on some of these decisions, and now it's a expedited calendar, so to speak?
Right. It goes to 10 days. The hearing has to be within 10-day period, 10 business days, and it can't be delayed, right?
So your Republican colleagues raised some concerns about the imposition of the guardian needing to demonstrate clear and convincing evidence that a visit by a family member isn't in the best interest of the ward, with your Assembly Republican colleague Mary Beth Walsh arguing that family dynamics are complicated and that maybe there should be a lower standard for keeping family away. What made you ultimately decide that there should be a higher standard for keeping people away?
My view, and as a legislator, is that you really, or one, a judge would need to have some darn good evidence to keep a family member away from a loved one. And so clear and convincing evidence, in my view, does that. I know the floor leader, she wants to keep it at a preponderance of the evidence. In my view, I think we're doing the judges a favor in that it was a harder decision to make for judges. I think that family members who are challenging a guardian, they don't necessarily have the resources that the guardians do. A lot of times these guardians are entities or organizations, and
a lot of nonprofits serve as guardians here in New York.
Right, and they're used to being guardians, and they know these things, and very often family members don't have the resources, and so they have to hire attorneys who specialize in this area, and that is costly and actually kind of difficult to do. So if there is an issue, then the guardian has to show cause and show that to a judge. And, my view, if it's clear and convincing, then by all means, keep that person away from the ward, and deny the visitations. But short of that, if familial bonds and relationships are key.
But presumably that family member who wants visitation now might have had an opportunity to be that guardian and ultimately either chose not to or wasn't allowed to do it. So should that be a red flag that the judge should consider, and why we should have maybe a lower standard for denying a visitation based on the fact that that family member is not a guardian?
That's a fair point. Guardianships in New York State, they say it's anyone over 18 or anyone who has an interest in the health and welfare of the individual who would become the ward. So very often entities like nursing homes or other, I don't want to call anyone out in particular, but family members necessarily don't have the wherewithal to file for guardianships. And so other entities end up becoming the guardians. And you would like to think that family members would step up from the outset. There are also scenarios where entities take over guardianships for whatever reason. They recognize that something is not happening or, is happening the way that they believe shouldn't be happening for the ward, and then they can file to take the guardianship themselves. And there are some significant financial reasons why some groups would want to maintain guardianships. Guardians have control over the estates. They get payments from being guardianship. So, those are some of the things that I believe that visitation from family members would benefit the ward.
In the process of moving this bill, did you get any feedback from the Office of Court Administration, the State Bar Association, or maybe some of those nursing homes that you referenced earlier?
So we reached out to the Court of Administration, the OCA, and the Office of Court Administration, and they didn't have an issue with this bill. They thought that it was a good idea and supported it.
And finally, I was struck by a comment you made during the floor debate about the idea that the New York guardianship program is operating quite well, saying that the program is done better in New York than most states. Given some of the concerns that have been raised about the program in the past, like the lack of available guardianship, what made you offer that endorsement?
Because I think by and large, New York is doing a good job with the guardianship system, and these are adults who in many cases can be benefited from having a guardian and having someone else take care of their medical decisions and financial decisions. And I did not want to have this bill disparage that system too much. But like I said, from the outset, I believe that more transparency, particularly for family members, is a good thing overall. So I wanted to give a shout out to the people that actually do this work, because I do believe that they do a good job.
And that was our conversation with Assemblymember Tommy John Schiavoni, a Long Island Democrat. And we'll have more with him on a future episode of the Capitol Press Room, where we talk about his first term here in the Assembly.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.